Hi, Chris Good here. We're going to talk about xanthines this week. So the three xanthines we're going to talk about are caffeine, theophylline or theophylline, and theobromine. And these are the xanthines that are found in coffee, tea, and chocolate, respectively. We're going to start with coffee. Coffee consumption in the U.S. has a long and proud history, of course, with the British taxation of tea prior to the American Revolution. Caffeine consumers in the United States leaned toward coffee so that they wouldn't be paying the tax on British tea. Use also increased, interestingly, during and just after Prohibition, when people couldn't get one drug, right? Alcohol was illegal during this decade. Consumption of another drug, caffeine, increased. That per capita U.S. coffee consumption continued to increase to the end of World War II and then started to fall off as caffeinated soft drink consumption increased. And currently, we average about 24 gallons of coffee per year per person. Not everybody drinks coffee, but those that do average about 24 gallons. Those who do means that the total averages out to 24 gallons of coffee per year per person. So even if you don't drink coffee, somebody's drinking 24 gallons per person. Even decaffeinated coffee has some caffeine in it. The way that they get the caffeine out of coffee is basically the same way we precipitate out other drugs from plants. You soak the plant in some kind of organic solvent. The one that we use mostly for decaffeinating coffee is methylene chloride or ethyl acetate, and you have to soak them in there for about 10 hours. It's not a perfect process, and as we'll see, there's some decaffeinated brands of coffee that still has some caffeine in it. So let's see, the 16-ounce cups of coffee samples had decaffeinated coffee with caffeine in the range from 8.6 to 13.9 milligrams. There was another study of popular brands of decaf coffees, and the caffeine content was anywhere from 3 milligrams up to 32 milligrams. So there's a lot of variability in how much caffeine you're actually getting in your decaf anything. There is another process that doesn't use, that uses a solvent that's water, not the ethyl acetate or dichloromethane. But that takes out more of the coffee's flavor, and so it's not preferred. We save the caffeine that we get from coffee beans in decaf and put it in soft drinks. So there are several ways that you can vary the amount of caffeine that is in your coffee. You can see from this list that these different methods of brewing coffee can adjust the caffeine content in terms of milligrams. So the automatic drip coffee that you get is that you can make at home in a small cup. It has about 115 milligrams of coffee. Percolator coffee has less caffeine, and instant coffee in the same volume has even less. Espresso has about 90 milligrams, but that's in a 2-ounce serving, a very small shot of espresso. Same deal with cappuccino, even if you add milk to it. A Starbucks tall coffee has about 250 milligrams of caffeine. Their Venti, their 20-ounce coffee, has 415 milligrams of coffee. And so there's some variability. What else can you do to vary the caffeine content in coffee? Well, you can grind up the beans more finely, and that will increase the caffeine content. You can add less water to the same amount of coffee grounds, and then of course you're going to have a more concentrated cup of coffee with more caffeine per ounce in it. You can also vary the caffeine content by the roast. So a darker roast coffee actually kind of counterintuitively has less caffeine in it than a lighter roast coffee on average. So those are ways that you can vary the amount of caffeine that you get in a cup of coffee. Tea has caffeine in it too. Tea is actually young leaves from the Camellia sinensis bush, and they're pruned back, and so the new growth leaves that come out are picked by hand about every 6 to 10 days. Those leaves are dried and they're rolled out to crush the cells in the leaves to release the the chemicals inside. And some of them are fermented, and that actually refers to the oxidation process. That they're calling that fermentation. It's not bacteria making alcohol, not that kind of fermentation. But when tea leaves are exposed to oxygen, they turn dark. They literally burn very, very slowly. That's what burning is. It's oxidation. And the black, the darkest tea that you get, is that's what those fully oxidized leaves are. Green tea are unfermented, unoxidized leaves, and then oolong is somewhere in between. It's greenish brown. It has partially oxidized leaves. And when we drink tea, we're simply soaking those leaves in hot water and drinking the water. In the U.S., we drink mostly iced tea, and in the southeastern U.S., we drink sweet tea, and sweet tea has a lot of sugar in it. It also has just regular tea leaves that have been brewed. Some people make sun tea. They put the tea outside so that a clear jar can interact with light. There are flavored teas that blend the tea plant with spices or other flavors like mint. There are herbal teas, but they don't. A lot of these herbal teas have no tea in them at all. They have a mix of different kinds of plant leaves and flowers, but they don't have any actual tea in them. So there's some examples over there in this picture. And these are the decaffeinated and caffeine-free herbal teas that you might see in the supermarket. Celestial Seasonings has a line of teas like that. So tea has caffeine in it. That's one of the xanthines that's present in tea. And pound for pound, tea has more caffeine than coffee, but we don't use tea in the same way that we use coffee. So you can get about 200 cups of tea out of a pound of tea leaves, but only about 50 to 60 cups of coffee out of 1 pound of coffee. That's tiny cups of coffee. Tea, therefore, has about 40 to 60 milligrams of caffeine per cup, so about half, a little less than half that you would find in coffee, but of course this depends on the type and the strength of the brew. Tea also has another xanthine in it. It's called theophylline or theophylline, and at high doses this used to be used as an asthma medication. We have better asthma medications right now, although I'm told that in an emergency you can pound a cup of coffee if you're having an asthma attack and nothing else is around, but of course you should always carry your bronchodilator inhaler with you. We're going to talk about the mechanism of these xanthines along with the third one, but first I wanted to mention that third one, chocolate. Chocolate contains a unique xanthine called theobromine, and we'll get to that in just a second. Chocolate originated in Mesoamerica, and the legend was that the cacao tree that produces these seed pods that you see in the picture to the right was a gift to humans from paradise, from the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. And Linnaeus, the famous taxonomist, named the cacao tree Theobroma, was the genus of the tree, meaning food of the gods. It was cultivated by Aztecs very widely, and the bean was an important part of their economy and culture. You hear these tales of the Aztec process of roasting the cacao pods to remove the husk, and then grinding up the kernels inside to get this sort of thick liquid that's a mix of chocolate and cocoa butter. If you mix that with water like the Aztecs did, you get a very bitter liquid that tastes kind of like baking chocolate. If you've ever been so desperate for chocolate that you go through your cupboard and eat the baking chocolate that's inside, that's what it tastes like. It's not the sweet type of chocolate that we have today. That has a lot of sugar added to it. So the xanthine that is abundant in chocolate is theobromine. It acts sort of like caffeine, but it's less potent in the central nervous system effects. The average cup of hot cocoa, has only about 4 milligrams of caffeine. And again, we'll talk about the mechanism in just a second. First, I want to look at the caffeine content of some common beverages. Again, with coffee, it's extremely variable, from very weak coffee up to very potent coffee in terms of its caffeine content. Decaf coffee still has some caffeine in it. Tea has less on average, less caffeine than coffee, but depending on how it's brewed and for how long the leaves are steeped, it could potentially have even more caffeine than is in coffee. Cocoa has just a tiny bit of caffeine in it. That's the caffeine that's present normally in chocolate. And of course, we have a lot of different types of caffeinated soft drinks, including the dark colas, but also the green colas like Mountain Dew, Mellow Yellow. Those typically have more caffeine than a regular cola flavored beverage. Jolt Cola has extra caffeine added to it, and then of course all the energy drinks like Red Bull and Monster and all of those things are really just, some of them are carbonated, some of them are not, beverages that are sweet and they have caffeine added to them. Chocolate by itself, not just hot chocolate, but chocolate bars have a little bit of caffeine in them. You can get caffeine in pill form. Vivarin and NoDoz are popular brands of stimulants that are sold to a lot of college students to keep them awake so that they can study longer. All right. So these are the three xanthines: caffeine, theophylline, and theobromine, and these are usually taken orally. Very few people actually inject caffeine or snort it or use it otherwise, but oral consumption means that peak levels are reached in about 30 minutes, and the half-life is about 3 hours. So after 3 hours, you still have half the caffeine that you started with in the morning. Caffeine is reinforcing. It's reinforcing in people. It's reinforcing in animals. And probably those reinforcing properties go beyond the prevention of withdrawal symptoms. So when people who are used to caffeine stop using it abruptly, you get symptoms like fatigue, headache, irritability, etc., etc. So the mechanism of action is through the adenosine system, which is a little bit complicated, but we see the molecule adenosine on the left and this xanthine caffeine on the right. So is that caffeine on the right? No, I think that's actually theophylline on the right. Here's a picture of all three of the xanthines: caffeine, theophylline, and theobromine. The two bottom ones have been flipped 180 degrees horizontally. And how they work is that they are adenosine receptor antagonists. So they're blocking receptors for adenosine. But adenosine normally is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So if you block the action of an inhibitory transmitter, that means that you have a net excitatory effect. And of course, it is an excitatory stimulant. It stimulates the central nervous system. It stimulates skeletal muscle. It can delay sleep or cause sleep disturbances if you're trying to sleep. It elevates the mood. It's also a vasoconstrictor. It constricts blood vessels in the brain. This might help explain the ability of caffeine to treat migraine headaches. So migraine headaches often result from vasodilation. So it might not be a little counterintuitive, but a lot of people experience head pain when blood vessels are too dilated and too much blood is flowing through. Caffeine is a vasoconstrictor and is often added to painkillers like acetaminophen or aspirin to treat migraine headaches specifically. So Excedrin is a common brand of painkiller plus caffeine. Tylenol migraine is a formulation that has acetaminophen plus caffeine. One more thing I should say about the adenosine receptor that's a little unusual is that it's expressed presynaptically. So we actually see receptors for adenosine on axon terminals that are releasing sometimes a different transmitter besides adenosine. Now, the receptor may receive adenosine that's released from another neuron through an axonal synapse, but the effect of adenosine usually is to decrease transmitter release of whatever is being released from this axon terminal, right? So the receptors appear here presynaptically, and when adenosine binds to its receptor, the net effect is to slow down release of this transmitter, which might be an excitatory transmitter like glutamate. When you block the receptor for adenosine, as do caffeine, theobromine, and theophylline, it has a net increase in the release of this excitatory transmitter glutamate because you're preventing adenosine from slowing down that transmitter release. So the specifics of that, a blockade of inhibition, actually have to do with a second messenger system. So the receptor for adenosine, similar to that for norepinephrine, as you can see in this slide, is that the receptor is usually associated with a G protein, which is a membrane-bound protein that exists on the inside of the, and again, this is the presynaptic neuron, and you're usually receiving this in some kind of axo-axonal synapse. So when adenosine binds to its receptor, part of this G protein dissociates from the rest of it. So this subunit of the G protein literally detaches from the rest of the G protein in response to adenosine binding to its receptor. This subunit activates an enzyme. It might be something like adenylyl cyclase, which is another membrane-bound enzyme. It has a little tail sticking up here to keep it. It's on the inside of the cell, but it's stuck to the inside of that cell membrane. Adenylyl cyclase may activate cyclic AMP, cyclic adenosine monophosphate, which may in turn phosphorylate a protein kinase, which might be affecting a potassium channel. And the end result of this is to decrease activity in the presynaptic neuron. If you block adenosine receptor here with caffeine or some other xanthine, then you get less inhibition of this cell, which in turn is releasing some other neurotransmitter that may be excitatory, right? So if you are stopping inhibition of an excitatory transmitter, well, that means you're increasing excitation. Causes for concern? Well, we don't really have very clear evidence that moderate caffeine consumption is dangerous. It's not particularly a strong risk factor in human cancer. It's not really a strong protective factor either, although some recent evidence has suggested there are certain cancers that you may be at reduced risk for them with caffeine consumption, but it's not really a strong protective factor. If you were pregnant, high consumption of caffeine will reduce the chance, it'll reduce the chance of you becoming pregnant. It'll slow the growth of the fetus if you are pregnant. So like other drugs, caffeine does cross the placental barrier. Research is mixed on whether caffeine increases the risk of miscarriage, but remember that determining the reproductive effects of caffeine are really it's difficult because you can't really do a controlled study on pregnant women. If you are prone to heart disease or if you have a pre-existing cardiac condition, like if you've had a heart attack or bypass surgery, your physician will tell you to avoid caffeinated beverages, and high intake caffeine might increase the risk of heart attack if you're prone to that and you haven't had any heart trouble before. But on a whole, although nothing is safe, this is one of the safer stimulants. I should say, though, that there is a dose of caffeine that'll kill you. And it's somewhere between 1 and 200 cups of coffee, small cups of coffee. That's like 5 or 6 ounce cups of coffee. So what is that, 50 or 60 ounces of coffee, or around 10 gallons. If you are able to drink that much in a short enough time, and I guess theoretically it's possible for you to go on a caffeine binge and drink that much coffee, you could kill yourself. It's much easier to do that if you have a more concentrated solution of caffeine, like if you have the caffeine pills. So, it is a drug. Even though it's a drug that many people use on a daily basis in our culture, there is a dose that can kill you, and so nothing is safe. And we'll end with that.